Hello, welcome everybody to this new webinar of the March release. So in this webinar we're going to show you the new features available for the HelloID March release, which was released this Monday. Hopefully you guys can hear me fine. If there's any troubles, issues with the sound or video or something like that, please let me know through the chat. If you have any questions during this webinar, you can put them in the chat and I will try to answer them as quickly as possible, depending on the topic. Also, I've put in the chat a link to a voting system for where you can vote on your favorite feature. So where you can vote on your favorite feature, and the more votes you get, the more I will talk about that topic or a feature, of course. So let's go have a look if there already are some votes. Currently we have one vote for the PowerShell after ID account action. So let's wait for a little bit to see if we get more votes in. And else we're going to start with the PowerShell after ID account action. Okay, so there's a second vote, so let's start with that. Okay, so we go to the HelloID portal, and of course we go to provisioning. And if you go to a target system, and in this case it's only for the Active Directory on-premise system, we have something new in account. So if we go to account, you can see here there is a kind of a life cycle of the account, which we already had with the PowerShell target connectors. So here we can put in what actions do we need to do for the create, the update, the enable, disable, and delete. And what we can do here is we can add some PowerShell scripting actions to the Active Directory, maybe to another system if we really want to. After an AD account is created, so directly after. So how does it work? Pretty easy. So you normally just configure your Active Directory. So I have a mapping here for Active Directory with a lot of fields. That's completely the same. But here what I can do is, let's say I want to add something after the account create. So maybe let's say the directory section that I can do here inside the connector isn't enough. So I need to do more, maybe a structure of folders or creating something like that as an example. What I can do here is I go to the account create and press on configure. And here I can create a script. I can create it, of course, from scratch, but I can also click on set default script. And this will help me set up a little of a template. And here I have a couple of new inputs from inside PowerShell which I can use. And also not all the outputs are available for this post action script. So let's talk about it a little bit. So first off, everything from the person, the manager, account reference, and the manager account reference are available, just like the normal actions. Of course, because you just created the account reference, the account reference is put into here, and normally in a create script you don't have an account reference because you create one. But in this case, because it's created in Active Directory, you have one. So you can use that to search in Active Directory for that particular account again. But there are also some other values that you can use with this. So the first one is the domain controller. So if you want to do an action again to Active Directory, it's really important to have the domain controller, because the AD account is just created on a particular domain controller and needs to be synchronized to different domain controllers. So it could be that the account is only available on the particular domain controller. So if you do any actions regarding Active Directory inside your post action script, it could be account create, but it could be a different one, use this domain controller. That's for Active Directory and also for Exchange. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Exchange later on. But use this domain controller in your command because it's really important, because else it could be a timing issue that your action fails. Another thing, because the Active Directory user is just created, you also get an Active Directory user as an object inside, which has a couple of properties like the object with the semi-account name and a distinguished name. So you can use that to search or set something in Active Directory. Also, you have the configuration, and the configuration is the same object that you can have with the custom PowerShell. I will show that later on how that works. But if you create a PowerShell system, you also can create some configuration for it. And we also supply this post script with some configuration you can configure the fields for in the UI. Another option you're getting is the Exchange configuration, and that depends if you enable the Exchange, yes or no. But if you do that, you will get your configuration you have in Exchange, like maybe the user and password for the login into the service account and things like that. But I will talk a bit more with how Exchange works later, because we do something special there. Also, you get the export data. So that means the export data is if you create an account, you can set on the field that you want to save that value of that account on the person. So then you can go to the person overview and you can say, okay, accounts data, and there you see the values with the field. You retrieve those in this post script, and it's really important to know that you can override them if you want to into PostScript. So you can set different values or add values, but you have to know that this export data is responsible for putting the data in. So if you only set one value or only add one value, there's only one value in the person object. So if you select two values in the config mapping, you think, okay, I would have three values in my person account data, but you just have one value because you have overwritten the two others. So if you're adding export data, just only add on the previous object, and don't forget that. Also in the comment you can see if it's empty or it's not presented, it will use the export data from the Active Directory mapping. So that's really important to know. With this we also support just audit logging, and you can use different actions if you want to, just like normally. And also it could be that the PostScript will fail, and in this case the whole task will fail if that's the case. So we're going to retry it again the next day or the next time the enforcement is run. Let me check if there are any questions before we go to the Exchange part. No, I don't see any new questions. Okay, so the Exchange part is a little bit different because I can execute scripting, PowerShell scripting, after an AD account is created. But what we can set here in with Exchange is I can enable Exchange, yes or no. So in the previous version, if you enabled this and you set, of course, your Exchange integration, so this means your local Exchange management, so not Exchange Online, you can connect to it and you create mailboxes like this. It's a little bit different now, because now you can say, okay, I want to enable Exchange management, yes or no. So if you don't enable this one, we don't create mailboxes, but you can do that with your scripting if you want to. And but if you still want to create mailboxes just like before, you can do it, just enable it, and here you can say it's hybrid for the remote mailbox or not, and you can set a remote routing address. But in some situation you want to do more against Exchange, maybe set the mailbox store or something like that, and you just want to do it with scripting. It's possible, just disable it. And then there's a different kind of trick. When you enable this Exchange integration, we automatically connect for you to to Exchange inside this PowerShell session. So you don't have to connect to Exchange. There is already a connection, so you can just fire Exchange commands to it using the PowerShell module. Also, we manage the sessions. So that means if you enable Exchange integration, all the actions are not in parallel, but they're limited, I think limited of 2. And inside the agent, we have a special PowerShell session keeping the Exchange available for that session. So we limit actions that are executed in parallel, but also we manage that the Exchange session is alive and things like that. So that makes it really easy to use an Exchange integration. So if you want to do something to Exchange which isn't the default method, just disable the Exchange management, so no mailboxes are created, and create your own mailbox with your own properties, however you want to, in the post scripting with PowerShell. If you just say, okay, please manage the mailbox creation as a whole, you can just enable it, and you can still do some other actions on the mailbox, of course, in the post scripting. So that's a bit of a difference. Do you want to have a simplified management tool where you can just enable it and it will hide the address list, or hide your mailbox from the address list when your account is disabled, and when it's enabled it's shown? Or you want to have more control over it, then you can change it back to disable the management like this and just put it on scripting, whatever you want to do. Like I say, you want a particular a location, database location or database store where you want to put the mailbox in, as an example. So we have a lot more flexibility on this in this version. Please keep in mind that you can do a lot in the PowerShell scripting, but do not put too much into this, because do not create a different account in a different system or something like that, because it's better to do that in a different target system and said, okay, that system is dependent on Active Directory, because in that case it's also better to have the different entitlements, because now everything is linked to a single account entitlement, and it's better to have that separated because you have more control over it. Maybe you don't see the benefits in the near future, but you will see that in the later future. Also, I mentioned the configuration, so you can add configuration to use in your post actions, and just like a normal PowerShell system, you can click on it and you can create fields, password fields, toggle switches, radio buttons, drop downs, everything you want to use for your configuration. So you can make it easier to change something in the system, or use something differently inside the post action script. So you can change it easily in a user interface. So this result is stored as an object in the configuration, and you can just use it inside the scripting. Of course, every action is also started if there is a script available. So in this case, no post action script will be executed because everything is clear. So on the meaning, if you configure something, so let's say we do an apply on a default script, you will see here, okay, the account created is executed because it contains a script. And you can, of course, clear it directly like this and nothing will be executed. Let me check if there are any questions. No, I don't see anything. So then we go to our poll and check if there are some new votes. Okay, so the second one is the delegated form improvements. So let's start with that. Also, I have to say I put it on the title Delegated Form Improvements because we have a lot of new features available in the last, I think, 3 releases. And now we all pushing them with a couple of new ones from this release as a new functionality. So in the previous version, it was kind of a feature flag where you can enable it in production portals if you wanted it. But now it's enabled as default for all the portals. So let me show you what it is, and we already talked about it a couple of webinars, but let me show it again in the whole, and of course a bit of part is a new functionality. So let's go to the delegated forms in the admin panel. So if I go to delegation and delegated forms, we already had the activities right, but now we're going to use them a little bit more. So what you can see here is I created a form, and if I go to edit, and if I go to task, you will see that we added some new scripting here. So normally if you wanted to add a task, you can click on a button add and you will get a catalog. And now you will just get this screen, and it has a few benefits. The first of all, you can just test your task here, and also you can run it in the cloud or on premise. You can switch it. So now it's also available to run the task at the end of a delegated form inside the cloud, which is better. Maybe a question you will have is, where are the old tasks? And if we go back to the delegated forms and let's go to this form, I think it has an old task. Yeah, here you can see the old tasks are still available, but since this release you can only edit these tasks. You cannot add any new ones. So if I remove this task and or I create a new form, you will have this new interface that I just shown you. So that's really important to know. So we're still supporting this, the old tasks I call, but we're gradually moving to the new infrastructure and the new task, which has a couple of benefits. With this, let me go back to the different form or the other form. With this, if you want to run this form, you can also select some input, and we make that a little bit easier. So now if you have this user interface and you go to a form, and let's switch to the editor, and now let's fill in this form with some values where you can test with. So let me go to this, deactivate. So now it's on the last page, and what I can do here, and this is new, is I can copy the form results. And this is really easy to use, because if I copy this and I go to my task and just put it in here, I can execute it, because this is the output of the form that's as an input of my task. And with this, I can easily check if my task with this input I just inputted inside the form editor, if it's working correctly. And of course, I can also change some values here, so I can change this enable to true and false. But if I just press execute, it will execute this script with this input, form input. And I can also see, in this case, my ID user is found because I just written here my login. And also I finish a disable of an account because the input was, I think, enabled as false. So if I change this to true, it should go to finish enable. Yeah, so that works. So here I can more easily test my task just in one screen. And I can just easily copy the input from a form and just place it in here. And that makes it a lot easier to program. And of course, everything is in one screen. right? We can just switch over to the form here and switch over to the task here. So it's a lot more easier to use in this case. So I don't have to click multiple times to go to somewhere. I think there is a question. Let me go to that screen. Will there be something for Exchange Online in the future? Oh, that's in the previous functionality. Yeah, on provisioning. Currently not yet, because Exchange Online is really hard, because we cannot execute the Exchange Online inside the Cloud PowerShell connectors, because there isn't any way we can import the PowerShell of the Exchange module in there, and that's the only way we can communicate with Exchange Online. Can you do it from a agent perspective? Yes, you can. And of course, if you have a hybrid environment, you can just select the hybrid, because then we do remote enabled remote commands, and you can just call your local Exchange, and it will send the commands to the Exchange Online and change things there. But if you're fully in Azure AD and fully with Exchange Online and Office 365, we currently don't have the situation where we can just script to that, because we cannot create PowerShell scripting in that. Also, we do a little trick inside our platform as well. So we cannot use the sessions and things like that. So that's really difficult. But hopefully in the future we will have something, and hopefully also Microsoft will make it easier to connect to Exchange Online without only using a PowerShell module, but maybe an API or something like that, just like Azure. But currently we don't have anything for that. And I don't see that coming in the near future as well. Hopefully this answers your question. So it was a little bit of a jump, but now we're back with the delegated forms. Like I mentioned, it's really important that you can do everything in just one screen. It should be more easier to create a delegated form with this whole setup. And of course, you can run it in the cloud. It's also a big advantage. Another thing that is changed, or that is introduced in the last releases, and are the activities. So normally we had the submissions, and these are still here, but they're going to be removed in a couple of releases, because the activities are a substitution of the submission. What's the difference? Submission was only recorded when a form was really submitted. The difference with an activity is already recording when, or there is already a record when you open a form and you do something like getting the data source or filling in a field or something like that. So it's more all the steps, so you can you have a better overview of what's there in the activities. So what's new there? So let's go to let's start this form, and I will show that in the activities. So let's go to the AD account creation. Let's search for my account. Select one. Currently is active, so let's disable it and then submit it. So now I've submitted. I'm going back to my portal and I'm going to activities. Also, if you want to see how this works with in between and with the data source, you can look at I think the previous two webinars that is more explaining and how these steps and activities work. But what you can see here now is I've submitted this form. The task status is successful. So the tasks that activates, or this disabled my account was successful. But now I can also look up into this instance, this activity of the form. So what I can do here is I can of course see the user that is using it, my start time of opening the form, and of course my submission time. In this way it's in the same minute, but it could be that there's a couple minutes between them. Also I can see my data source logging. So I can see what happens in that activity, and that was previously available. And I can see the form submission logging, and this one is new. So here I can see my task logging. So here I can see in the task after the submission was done, it found my Active Directory user and it finished my disable of the Active Directory user. Besides that, I can see also my form data. So this is the data that was the input for my task that is run to, in this case, disable the Active Directory user. So if we go back to form data, you will see that the active is disabled. So it should be disable the Active Directory user. If I do it again, so let's go back to the service desk and let's say I'm going back again. And you see my Active Directory account is disabled, so let's enable it again. In this case, let's not submit it yet. Let's start it in. Now you can already see I opened the form and you can see the submitted is no and no task is executed. But what I can already see is my data source logging, because we picked up some data from an existing from Active Directory in this case, so generating a user properties and things like that. And if I press on submit, it will execute the task and things like that. So if I refresh the screen here, you'll see now my task is successful and I've submitted the form. If I go back again and go to form submission logging, you'll see that I enabled the AD user now, and if I go back to form data, you will see that the switch is on and not off. So that's the reason why I enabled the Active Directory user. With this, it's also really handy to see if anything was going wrong. So let's simulate this by changing the form. So let's go to the task, and now you don't need to send anything more, but if you just have an error, so with the right error, you will see that a task has gone wrong. So let's force this a little bit by saying right error, and let's say couldn't find so something like this. So this could not find the Active Directory user as an error. So let's save it. Of course, normally I will not do this, and I will check it with the input and check if this works, but I think it's a small change, so it should work. And now if I go to the activity again, let's search for the same user. That's to be consistent, and now we disable it, submit it. And let's go back to the activities. We see here the form is submitted, but in this case the task status is filled, and it also shows one task error. It could be of course multiple, but in this case just one. And if I go to my task, I can go to my task logging, and I can see here, oh, there is an error. And after that there's also of course the information and the finish disable Active Directory user. So it's really important that you skip everything if you're giving an error, because the script continues. But there's also another change here, and that's the retry button. So now if a task is filled, we can retry it again if we want to. Normally if I press retry, of course, now it doesn't work, because the problem is still in my task. So if I change it again, it should be still failing. And if I go to task logging, you can see, okay, it's submitted, and this is the first retry. It fails again. But if I go back to the delegated form and change it and go to my task and just remove this line, go back to the activities, open it, and go to the task logging and retry it again. I have to refresh my screen because it's not updated automatically, but in this case you can see the task status successful and no errors occurred. But we still have the logging of the retry, so you can still see that it's on the third retry, right? And then it's completed successfully, no errors. So that's really important that you have one place where you can see all the activities of an submission and instance of that form. So it's really easy to look at, okay, what went wrong, or did it work as intended to? And we're going to improve this a lot more. But that's the main focus, I think, is putting everything on one place to in one side configure, and the other in sort of logging, process logging, having one place where you can see the more details of a submission or how the form is used. So let me check if there are any questions. No, there aren't any questions. Okay, so let's continue with the features. Yeah, let's do it just with the time frame, and then no, let's do the disable, approve, and deny buttons from email first, and then we go to the time frame of reports. Both are a little bit smaller new features, but if you go to the self-service and you go to the approval workflows, and just go to one workflow, let's go to this one, we have a new option here, and it's hide email approve buttons. And what it does is, when you have a workflow that needs to be approved, in this case by a manager, the manager will receive an email. And I think last year or something like that, we introduced that you can press on a button inside the email, and then the request is automatically approved without going to the portal, logging into, and press on a button inside the portal. Now you have the ability to hide these buttons. So then you will get an email, but it doesn't contain the button, so but just an URL that goes to the portal, and the manager has to log in, or maybe it's already logged in, then he doesn't, but he has to press on a button inside the portal to approve it or deny it. So that's the difference. In this case, if you have buttons, you don't have to go to the portal and press on a button inside the portal. You can do it directly via the mail. And it's in some cases preferable because it's a little bit quicker. But there are also some differences in security, because the button inside the email will only be valid for, I think, 24 hours. And after that, you still have to go to log into the portal and just press on the button again. So in some cases, there was a wish, I think, for hiding these buttons. So now you can do that inside your workflows, approval workflows. The other feature is the timeframes. So if we go to the reports in the top here, and then it's loading. And you have a lot of reports here, of course, with Action Management. I think 4 or 5 new reports also were uploaded with this release. So please check them out. I'm not going to talk about them and also we did some updates with some new information, and we're also always tweaking those reports and have better ones. But let's open the portal login location. I think that's a nice one. Oh, I think I have an issue. I don't know what happened there. So what we have now is in the top bar, you can set the time period that you see here. In the previous reports, it was always 3 months. The default now is 1 month because we have a lot of data, and I think it gives a better overview. But if you want 3 months, you can just change this number to 3, and now I have 3 months. Or let's say the last 3 days. And you will see that the information is changing rapidly. So if I go to 1 day, I will only have 70 and a bit of 16 March, of course, because it's 24 hours 1 day. The other difference is you can also click, this is the last option, but you can also click in the from option, and then you can select your timeline, whatever you want to. So here you can also look in a particular time, not in the last 3 months or 3 days or I don't know, last year, but you can look into a particular point in time that you want to set because something occurred, or you're curious, or maybe the auditor wants to know something like that. So that's a really nice option to have better time selection for the reports, and this works with every report we have, and also with your custom reports this works. So you don't have to do anything with your custom reports to use this, but it works as default for all the reports that you create or already available in production. Okay, let me go back to the questions to see if there are any questions. No, I don't think, no, there are any questions. So then I would like to thank you for this webinar and your attention, and hopefully we will talk to you in the next webinar. And of course, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and also hit the bell icon so you will not miss a webinar. If you have any questions, you can send them to our particular support department, or if you have a question about this video, you can also put a comment in YouTube, and we want to try to react on it. And of course, if you have any feedback for the software, you can go to roadmap.helloid.com, click on the feedback button, and you can enter some feedback. And of course, you can also see the new features available in the next releases on the roadmap.helloid.com. So thank you for your attention, and until the next time.